If French construction is so very complete, it is in large part due to its culture, a culture whose natural resource was talent and quality production. Production that was constantly put under surveillance by the corporation, or as we would think here, as the guild system, and supported wholeheartedly by the king, who was intent on making France independent of all imported luxury items. Eventually, new industries would be founded that could compete successfully with those products so desired from Italy, Spain, England, and the Netherlands. France was not the only European country to have corporations or guilds, but is the only one to have organized in such a way of precision. The term corporation is a modern term used to qualify globally the two distinct bodies of merchants and artisans of an ancient regime. The most important and wealthy merchants were termed the corps, reserving the term communes for those more modest associations of artisans and merchants. French construction is also unique simply because of its tools. I was constantly amazed at how many tools I did not know existed. I thought I knew all the available tools for wood, both American, English, and international in general. I assumed as well that I had a rather sophisticated collection in my own workshop before going to France. I was discovered in Paris a gamut of tools that are not available outside of the country. There are still family-owned businesses, two left, that produce handmade tools such as rasps. In my estimation, nothing finer has ever been made by machine. The sharpness of and durability of these rasps is incomparable to anything I have ever used. I have also seen an unending variety of hand planes that are used for very, very special tasks. In truth, it is another world. It is not surprising that there is a rather marked difference in the construction vocabulary as well. Words that do not have a counterpart in the English language. Defining, for example, a portion of an edge of a drawer, non-existent in the English except for generic terms. Clearly, French construction developed alongside the creations of specialty tools. And the traces of these tools are the roadmaps for a restorer and conservator. In truth, a highly experienced restorer is the true expert in determining age and authenticity. Even if forgers can sometimes dupe the finest expert, an experienced cabinet maker can read a piece better than a suited expert any day. He or she will know the difference between an object whose cutting marks were executed by hand or machine. By deciphering the thickness of the saw blade utilized, one can determine if it was a hand saw and what kind of hand saw, or a different type of 18th century cutting machine, or a saw blade of the 19th century. However, is the object intended for a museum or a private collection only, strict procedures will be considered. The analysis will be lengthy, and second opinions might be sought. Indeed, certain cracks, degradations, or even warping might remain untouched to the restorer or the conservator. The goal of conservation today in France is to preserve as much of its original structure and finish as possible, and to accept its imperfections as part of its personal history, its personal life. There is constantly a delicate balance to consider. Do you remove a finish or merely clean it? Do you undo an improper restoration? Or does that abusive restoration become a part of its history? Each element is to be weighed, and a proper and honest restorer and conservator will consider his actions and its consequences, whether grave or not. Either scenario at the Bull must be thoroughly, meticulously thought through, documented and photographed, and then presented to the client, much like a doctor preparing a patient for an impending surgery. Only after the client has accepted the proposal and the estimated cost, and that has all been agreed upon, does the restorer begin his or her intervention. I was rather amused by the constant corollary to medicine, being a formal med student, and began to benefit from what I had also thought was a wasted part of my life. I was perhaps the only student in the Bull Restoration program that understood, even in French, the lectures in our chemistry class and our physics class, which led me to the understanding in French of molecular structure and chemical reactions of certain substances on particular woods. I think it's important to note that there is a perspective in France that some American buyers for quite some time not understand the reality of period pieces. It seems that not just a few Americans favor antiques that look new and finishes that are highly glossed and will reject a piece that has appropriate signs of age and a natural looking finish. One must understand that finissant à la tympan, or French polishing, referred as French polishing, did not exist in the 18th century. It developed in the second quarter of the 19th century and is quite inappropriate to place a high sheen and smooth sheen of this caliber on such pieces of the 18th century. In addition, chairs were merely waxed until the style of Louis XV, who required all of them to be painted. So again, knowing these historic details helps preserve the authenticity and prevents serious gaffes. If there is a mantra at the École Boulle that was driven into my mind, my psyche, it was to never, but never execute a procedure that is irreversible, especially on a period piece that has a pedigree or a traceable history. That is where the scrupulousness of a restorer is paramount. I am not suggesting that these procedures are always adhered to today and everywhere in the world, but throughout France, nor that there are any other charlatans posing as fine restorers. But I am suggesting that there is a standard, and there are restorers that are still practicing it with aptitude and moral integrity in France. And those are the individuals that are entrusted with the most venerated objects in the world of art. And those objects of art are still in existence today because of them. Another generation with the same principles. It is important and personally interesting for me as a reproducer of 18th century masterpieces for the last 30 years to note that throughout the centuries, restorers and reproducers, known as a copyist in France, was always present even after handmade procedures gave way to machinery in the early 1810s, 30s, and 40s around the world. The Industrial Revolution did not replace handmade furniture entirely. There was always a stable of artisans that could reproduce any period and restore an original if required. Every major furniture company who made its fortune on series and low-style furniture had artisans that would satisfy the request of the elite, who never lost an appetite for 18th century styles.